Few people understand their significance in reaching their generation. Hi, I'm Bill Wright. If you've ever asked questions like, why did God have me born in this century? Where do I fit in God's plan? How will God use me to minister to my generation? Well, today on the Mini Bible College, you'll identify with the Old Testament prophet Isaiah, referred to as the Prince of Prophets. Stay tuned to discover more.
Now that we have profiled the prophet for you as an introduction to this largest section of the Scripture, which is called the prophets, it's time for us to come to the first prophet that we take in sequence as we survey the Old Testament prophets. The prophet Isaiah is a good prophet to begin with because he's a definitive prophet. If we get into the life and the preaching of Isaiah, we'll have a very good insight into what all the rest of these prophets are going to be like. He's also a good one to begin with because he is the prophet's prophet. He is quoted more in the New Testament than any other prophet, and he has more messianic prophecies. That is, he prophesies the coming of Jesus Christ more than any other prophet. They say you can reconstruct the life of Jesus Christ just by studying all these prophecies of Isaiah that tell about the coming of Jesus Christ. So, for many reasons, it's good for us to begin with this prophet. Now, Isaiah came from the Jewish nobility. He was related to a king, and so he probably was very at home in king's palaces. The prophets, as we said in our introduction to the prophets, came from every walk of life. Priests were born priests because they were descendants of Levi or Aaron, but the prophets were called to be prophets from every walk of life imaginable. Now, Amos is a fig picker and a shepherd, a very humble, what we would call today a layman. Well, Isaiah comes out of the king's palaces. He's royalty. He's part of the Jewish nobility. He prophesies and he lives at a time when Assyria is the great world power. We've mentioned many times in going through the history books that Assyria was the worst enemy Israel ever had. And Isaiah lived before Assyria conquered that northern kingdom and carried those 10 northern tribes off into captivity. Many people don't realize that Assyria was also the great enemy of the southern kingdom. Now, the prophets are important not only because they preach and not only because they live these exemplary lives, but they make an important contribution also to the history of Israel, and I mean the political history of Israel. Isaiah, for instance, had his shining hour as a prophet. He made his big contribution to Hebrew history when the Assyrians conquered that northern kingdom and turned south and went down right to the gates of Jerusalem. They took 200,000 captives out of the southern kingdom, and they sacked 46 walled cities in the southern kingdom of Judah and went right up to the gates of Jerusalem. And at this point, the Assyrian king read all kinds of insults to King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah was the king at that time, and he was a good king. And this Assyrian king made all kinds of charges against Israel, much like Goliath did before he challenged David, and David challenged him. Goliath was coming at every day, hurling insults at the army of Israel. And David, when he heard that, said, why, someone should read him his rights. He's making charges against the living God. Well, this Assyrian king did much the same thing. He said to the men on the wall of Jerusalem, your God isn't going to help you. He didn't help that northern kingdom or all those other people we've taken captive, and he isn't going to help you either. And so he wrote a document out asking them to surrender and putting all these insults in writing. And King Hezekiah took that letter over to the temple and he spread it out before the Lord. And he just said, now God, here are these charges. These charges are not against me. They're against you. And he, in so many words, is saying, God, what are you going to do about it? Well, at this point, the great prophet Isaiah gets a prophecy. He isn't in the temple overhearing Hezekiah. God just speaks to him, gives him a prophecy. So he comes marching into the temple, and he gives Hezekiah this prophecy. And he says that somebody should have read that Assyrian king his rights, because God's going to take care of him. He's going to get word that he's desperately needed at home, and he's going to head for home. And when he gets home, he's going to be killed. He's going to be assassinated. Now, the next morning, when the Assyrians woke up in their camp, 185,000 of their people had died from a plague, and the rest that didn't die hurriedly went back to their homeland, which would have been perhaps the capital of Nineveh. They went back there because they had received word that they were desperately needed there. Apparently somebody was attacking them. And when that king got home, he was assassinated by his two sons, who martyred him or assassinated him with their own swords. So this great prophecy of Isaiah came true. And that was his shining hour, probably the pinnacle of his ministry. But now he lives not only during that period. If you want to get historical perspective on Isaiah, he preaches and has a ministry for almost 60 years. And so his span of ministry as a prophet covers several kings. In fact, in the opening verses of prophecy, like Isaiah, you'll discover how the prophets give us their historical context. This is the way you get dates in the prophetic books. The prophecy of Isaiah begins this way. These are the messages that came to Isaiah, son of Amos, in the visions he saw during the reigns of King Uzziah, King Jotham, King Ahaz, and King Hezekiah, all kings of Judah. You see, it tells us what kings were reigning during the time that this man preached or prophesied, and that gives us historical context. Now, if you know anything about those kings from reading the book of Kings, you know that Isaiah covered a lot of history. In your notes, we've tried to give you an illustration of the different periods, the different kings under which this prophet was ministering. And we show you, because of the reign of that particular king and what we know about the historical setting or the political climate, the spiritual climate that associated his reign, we understand why Isaiah preached in that period the way he preached. And so in your notes, we've given you this under these headings. But coming back now to our introductory approach to this man, another pinnacle that he reaches in his prophetic ministry is his prophecy concerning Cyrus the Great. You see, Isaiah lived before the Assyrians even conquered the northern kingdom. He lived at least 100 years, maybe 80 years, before the Babylonians conquered the Assyrians and then went down and conquered Jerusalem and took the Hebrew people off captive into Babylon. And living 80 to 100 years before that, in a miraculous prophecy, he prophesied that that was going to happen. He prophesied that Babylon would conquer Assyria and then go down and conquer the southern kingdom and take them off captive. He also prophesied that after the Babylonians did this, they would be conquered by Persia. And one of the first things the Persian emperor would do after he conquered Israel was to issue a decree saying that those captives who were taken off into Babylon, which has now become Persia, were free to go back and rebuild their city, their temple, and their nation. Now, here's a remarkable example of foretelling prophecy. He even names this emperor, who doesn't even exist yet, Cyrus the Great. And he says, Cyrus, you're going to let those people go. You're going to issue that decree that will tell them they can go back and rebuild their country. Now, the historian Josephus tells us that the way that happened was when Cyrus the Great became the emperor of Persia, Media Persia, the elders of the Jews went to him and showed him this prophecy, this document written by this prophet Isaiah. And they said to Cyrus, you see, this little old prophet, he named you years before you even existed. What do you think of that, Cyrus? Well, they feel that that moved Cyrus to issue that decree. This is one of the great miracles of Hebrew history. Why would this pagan emperor issue a decree to release those captives? They feel it must have taken a supernatural event to convince them of that. And many feel that that was the supernatural event. The supernatural prophecy of Isaiah was what moved him to do this. Another reason they feel that this is the case is that that decree of Cyrus, which is quoted in the book of Ezra, is like a direct quote from portions of Isaiah. Now, if this is true, then this prophet Isaiah not only saved the southern kingdom from Assyria, we can say that if it were not for this man and his influence, not just the northern kingdom would have been taken captive by the Assyrians and never heard of again, but the northern and the southern kingdom would have been carried off into oblivion and never heard of again if it hadn't been for this man. And then, through his supernatural prophecy, even long after he's dead, it's his prophecy that saves the captives there in Babylon from extinction and gives them the opportunity to come back and rebuild the nation and keep this messianic nation of people perpetuating up until the time the Messiah comes. And so you just can't overestimate the importance of this man in terms of his contribution, not only to the prophetic message and the messianic prophecy, but the actual perpetuation of this nation. As the other prophets did, Isaiah speaks out against the wickedness of the kings who were wicked. And it's felt that when he spoke out against a wicked king named Manasseh, he brought about his death. Now this is only based upon tradition. Tradition says that King Manasseh, who was very wicked, had this man martyred by putting him in a hollow log and then sawing that log in half. In other words, Isaiah was sawed in half just as if he were part of that log. In the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, when it talked about the Hebrews of faith from the Old Testament period, it said some were sawn asunder. Well, many people believe that that's a reference to the martyrdom of this great prophet Isaiah. You can never be but so sure about tradition, but one thing we do know for sure, the critics have certainly tried to saw asunder the prophecy of Isaiah, because for many, many years now, the critics have been saying that the book of Isaiah was not written by one prophet, but at least by 4 different Isaiahs. For 1,500 years, 1,700 years, nobody ever doubted that there was one author of this book. But because of the higher criticism, you have this attempt to saw up the book of Isaiah into several parts. Now, there are many reasons why the book does seem to naturally divide into sections. One is that his ministry spanned 60 years, and the first part of the book, the first 39 chapters, was written when he was young. And then the second section, which is chapter 40 to 66, which is very different from the first section, was written when he was older and more mature. There's a big difference in the preaching of a preacher when he begins his ministry or after he's been preaching for 60 years. And so there's a big difference in those 2 sections of the book of Isaiah. It is possible to believe in the unity of Isaiah, and it's felt by conservative scholars that the reason why the higher critics have attacked this book and tried to show that it was different authors and it wasn't really written during the lifetime of Isaiah is because they want to take away from the supernatural aspect of this prophecy about Cyrus the Great. There are many people who just plain don't believe in a supernatural God or anything supernatural. And when they come to the prophecy of Isaiah, they have something to explain. How could this man who lived when he lived give us this great prophecy about Cyrus the Great, who wasn't going to live for another 150 or 170 years? Well, they just simply can't handle that. And so they say there were several Isaiahs, and they didn't live when this man Isaiah lived, and therefore they take away, the impact of this supernatural prophecy. But there are many people who haven't parked their brains, who do believe there was an Isaiah, and this Isaiah did give us supernatural prophecy. Now, when you look at the way the book divides, you see an amazing parallel between the book of Isaiah and the Bible. Some call the book of Isaiah a little Bible, and there are these striking parallels. For instance, there are 66 books in the Bible, and there are 66 chapters in the book of Isaiah. These 66 chapters divide in 2 ways. The first 39 chapters give us the first section of Isaiah, which is very much like an Old Testament, which has 39 books in it. The emphasis is upon the chastisement of God and the kind of chastisement of God that brings us to our senses and shows us the truth about ourselves and gets us to seeking a solution. And then the book of Isaiah divides into 27 chapters, which are very much like the New Testament, which has 27 books. Now, it's amazing how these parallels continue. That New Testament section of Isaiah, where there's 27 chapters, chapters 40 to 66, begin with the 40th chapter of Isaiah, of course, which has the voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, and that's the way the New Testament begins. And the Old Testament, is very much like those first 39 chapters of Isaiah again, because they're like the surgery, you might say. And then chapters 40 to 66 are like the healing after the surgery. And they begin with, comfort ye, my people, speak ye comfortably to Jerusalem. Well, it's just amazing to see the parallels between the Bible itself and the way it's organized in this one book of Isaiah. Now that second section of Isaiah, chapters 40 to 66, is probably the section that will be your favorite. Most people have favorite chapters in Isaiah that all come from that second section. And that second section can be divided up into three sections. First of all, there is chapter 40 to 48, which has to do with that miraculous prophecy about Cyrus. And then there is chapters 49 to 57, which have to do with the prophecies about the Messiah in his first advent. And then there's chapters 58 to 66, which have to do with the second advent of the Messiah. We've illustrated this for you in your notes. If you'd like to consult your notes, you'll see that we've diagrammed the way you can divide up these three sections of the second part of Isaiah. You'll also see we can rightly divide Isaiah in an overall sense. And again, we've illustrated this for you in your notes if you want to consult them. You can divide Isaiah up into three sections in this way. First of all, you had the first 36 chapters, and those first 36 chapters give a lot of prophecies about the conquest of Assyria over the northern kingdom and the conquest of Babylon over the southern kingdom. And then in chapters 36 to 39, you actually have this happening. You have the historical narrative which describes that this actually happens, the Assyrian captivity especially. And then you have that last section, 40 to 66, which is the comfort section that parallels the New Testament. Now, these divisions of Isaiah have been outlined for you in your notes. Now, there are devotional garden spots in the book of Isaiah, and we said when we started this course that there's such a vast amount of material in the Bible, especially in the prophets, that it's our intent to guide you to the garden spots, the devotional garden spots, so that you might get the devotional application. Now, if you haven't got time to study or read the whole prophecy of Isaiah, the longest prophet in the Bible, 66 chapters, then especially concentrate on chapters 5, 6, 11, 40, 53, 55, and 61. I believe you'll find that those chapters are the garden spots of this great prophecy. Again, they're chapters 5, 6, 11, 40, 53, 55, and 61. Now, I would like for us to listen to a passage from this great prophet which really introduces us to him. Many feel that this is the story or the record of his call to preach, and some say it's even more than that. They say it is a record of his conversion, because in this account we're told about his sins being forgiven, and that seems to indicate maybe even a conversion. But here's the way it goes. In chapter 6 of Isaiah, here's the record of his great spiritual experience. The year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. He was sitting on a lofty throne, and the temple was filled with his glory. Hovering about him were mighty six-winged seraphs. With two of their wings they covered their faces, with two others they covered their feet, and with two they flew. In a great antiphonal chorus they sang, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. Such singing it was. It shook the temple to its foundations, and suddenly the entire sanctuary was filled with smoke. Then I said, My doom is sealed, for I am a foul-mouthed sinner, and I am a member of a sinful, foul-mouthed race, and I have looked upon the King, the Lord of heaven's armies. Then one of the seraphs flew over to the altar, and with a pair of tongs picked out a burning coal. He touched my lips with it, and said, Now you are pronounced not guilty, because this coal has touched your lips. Your sins are all forgiven. Then I heard the Lord asking, Whom shall I send as a messenger to my people? Who will go? And I said, Lord, I'll go. Send me. And he said, Yes, go. But tell this people, though you hear my words repeatedly, you won't understand them. Though you watch and watch as I perform my miracles, still you won't know what they mean. Then I said, Lord, how long will it be before they're ready to listen? And he replied, Not until their cities are destroyed without a person left, and the whole country is another wasteland, and they are all taken away as slaves to other countries far away, and all the land of Israel lies deserted. Yet a tenth will remain, a remnant will survive, and though Israel is invaded again and destroyed, yet Israel will be like a tree cut down, whose stump lives to grow again. Now this great account of his calling, we might say, to preach, or even perhaps his conversion, is found in the 6th chapter of Isaiah. Now in this experience, we're told that Isaiah saw God. He saw the King. And like other people in the Old Testament, when he saw the Lord, when he saw God, when he saw the King, he had two responses. First of all, he couldn't find words to express what he felt about the holiness of God. And then he seemed to run out of words as he tried to express the way he felt about himself, that he was a sinner, a member of a foul-mouthed race, and a very foul-mouthed man himself. There are many reasons why people feel this might have expressed his conversion, but at any rate, he's doing what so many people in the Scripture do. You might call it the coming and the going of the men of God. They all have these experiences that could be classified under the heading of the coming experiences. They have a coming to God that's meaningful before they have a going for God that's meaningful. First, they become the great worshipers of God, and then as a result of becoming the great worshipers of God or coming to God, then they have their great going for God, at which time they become the great workers for God. Now this seems to happen to Isaiah just as it did to Jacob and to Job and to Moses and Paul and many others in the Scripture. Notice that this experience happened to him when Uzziah died. Very often there's a person in our life that we lean upon and we kind of piggyback their faith. They're the person that we really look to. And when God takes them, then there isn't any place to look but to God. Maybe that's the significance of the fact that this happened to him in the year that King Uzziah died. You might summarize this experience in chapter 6 this way. First of all, you have his confession, I am a foul-mouthed sinner. And then you have his cleansing. You are pronounced not guilty, the record said. Then you have his calling. All these men of God who come to God meaningfully, they end up going for God. You might even say that if a person isn't going for God in some sense, you can probably count on the fact that they're not coming either. The honest prophet among the prophets is the prophet Jonah. God tells him to go to the capital of his enemies, Nineveh, and he doesn't want to do that because he hates Ninevites. And he's honest enough to tell God, no, I'm not going. And he says, what's more, I'm not coming either. And so it says he fled from the presence of the Lord because he knew that if he came to God, he'd hear the words from God, now go. Well, this happens to Isaiah. You have his calling, and the calling is, now who will go? And then you have his commitment, Lord, I'll go, send me. And then you have his commission, yes, go, but tell my people this, I'm going to perform miracle after miracle, and yet you're not going to believe. You're not going to understand the words that I preach, and you're not going to understand the miracles that you see, which could be, really the validation of what I'm preaching. Now this shows us something about this prophet. It's hard enough to be a preacher, but it would be, to me, very, very hard to be a good preacher and not have anybody ever come to hear you. Just imagine not having any hearing at all, and you really are a gifted preacher. Well, Isaiah is the prince of the prophets. He's the greatest of the prophets. He's not only the greatest of the major prophets because his book is the longest, he's the greatest of the prophets because he was probably the best preacher among the whole lot of them. And yet when he's commissioned to preach, when he's called to preach, God says to him, Isaiah, you're not going to have one person who will listen to you. They're not going to understand what you preach. They're not going to do what you say. There are going to be miracles, a whole string of them, but those miracles won't convince them. Now, I think a lot of us living today would have said, well, then why am I going? I mean, I'm going to spend my time and my talent some other way. But he shows his great commitment to God here because he just asked the question, how long? How long do you want me to do that? Now, he did it for 60 years. And so the answer could have been 60 years. But God just says, until their cities are conquered, until they're all taken off as slaves to another land, that's how long. Well, I'm amazed at the consecration of this man and the commitment of this man. And then we might call this his contract with God. And the contract with God is simply until they're all taken away as slaves. So here's one of the greatest preachers who ever preached, and when he's commissioned or called to preach, he's told he won't have a hearing, and he just says, Lord, how long will it be? I think the life and ministry of Isaiah shows us so many things. One thing it shows us when we see his experience of being commissioned to preach is it's not how fruitful we are that matters, it's how faithful we are that matters. I've known missionaries who have ministered for 25 years in a foreign country and never seen one person come to Christ. The important thing, and the thing that seems to keep them going, is they're not just there to be fruitful, they're there to be faithful. They're there because God put them there and he said, preach. You might say that the faithfulness is our part and the fruitfulness is God's part. This also is illustrated by the life and the ministry of Isaiah. Well, here we have a great prophet, the greatest of the prophets. Get into Isaiah and you'll understand what all the other prophets are going to be like as we survey.
I feel like we've enjoyed a full-course meal with that message. You know, the book of Isaiah is it's just so rich in teaching. What a wonderful study. And I so appreciate what Dick pointed out about the man Isaiah, his commitment, his willingness, his sacrifice. Well, that wraps up another day of fine teaching with Pastor Dick Woodward. And I hope you've been blessed by the presence of the Lord today as you've listened. And if you enjoyed today's program, I hope you'll join us again next time as Pastor Dick takes us once again into a new lesson as he continues teaching us through the Bible. Thank you, and may God bless you until we meet again.